the part where it's sort of a challenge as a software company, as we think about the user interface and like who we're designing this for, there's just a lot of friction points in the executing on a financial plan for multifamily that I think we need to solve both the executives and sort of the leaders who are coming up with like the analysis and the action plans that they need to go execute on, but then in a way that's really easy for the on-site team members. And that's where I think we've got an edge, just because we've done this before, as former operators. I think the biggest pressure to perform have been in third-party, management companies, because 30-day notice, they can fire you and you need to stay competitive. And so we see that they have a really big need to know what's going on so that they can justify their operational decisions to their clients.
Welcome to the Digible Dudes podcast. Today we are here with myself, David, and
Nicole.
That's right. You got a guest star here, Reed's on vacation. I think he's in Seattle. Yeah. So I'm sure he's having a good time. Although it's a travel day back, so maybe it's not a good time with him. But today we have one of the founders of Vizibly on the podcast, which we had tried to get at NAA, but they were too busy to do our little sideline reporting there. So we got it scheduled for after. So I was very excited to have our chat today. But what were your biggest takeaways from today's conversation?
We kind of hit everything from like their origin story to, some company building, some culture questions. We talked a lot about like the user experience and solving kind of multiple problems, like how they're solving multiple problems in the platform for different personas. And then I thought Bryant was a wealth of knowledge on, his background, having 10 years spent in multifamily, kind of merging like the financial background with, budgeting, and really how he's bringing that and lifting that to Vizibly. So I thought it was an overall great conversation that we took in many different areas, but ultimately it was a great story.
Yeah, I was impressed with how much he's gotten done. And, he and the team have gotten done with just over a year since the company's been formed. Yet I can understand why he made such great progress, because he basically built this to scratch his own itch. The problems he had when he was at Greystar and Steadfast is kind of what gave him the concept to say, hey, let's go ahead, let's build a platform for this. And so I think it's because he was the target user that he could just tell the engineering team, this is exactly what I need, go build it, versus having to do all this discovery and client engagement and such. And he said he had done a lot of that sort of market validation discovery even before he started the company, just talking to his network. So thought he's approached it in a very smart manner. And now it's all about getting distribution, getting people to agree that we need systems for budgeting and forecasting that are better than just Excel. Here's why, and here's how. Even though, as he said, like the market's been really good recently, it's you can still increase your margins even more if you were to adopt a platform, like they've built it Vizibly.
Yeah, and we didn't get too much into roadmap, but you could tell he has a ton of ideas for the future of the platform, different features that they're building. So I'm really excited to see what they do.
Yeah. So why you should care about a platform like theirs today, and maybe this conversation that we had with him is right now budgeting happens once a year, as we all know, kind of like towards the middle of the prior year to through Q3, and then it sort of stays as a stagnant budget. It's very hard to reconcile with real life. How are we actually trending against that original budget? And as he said, many people are working at different platforms. So what they're pushing is, hey, get everybody into one platform. Use the same dashboard, if you will, so that you're looking at the same data, apples to apples, and then you can quickly make data-driven decisions. So to improve property performance, and you don't need a huge team of FP&A to get that done. Anything else about why people should care?
No, I think we hit it. It's a good one.
Okay, cool. All right, well, hope you guys enjoy this conversation with Vizibly. Welcome, Bryant, to the podcast. Bryant, why don't you give us your background and a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Briant Cárcamo. I'm the CEO of Vizibly. We make a decision intelligence platform for multifamily that helps connect the dots between operational decision making and financial results. We make budgeting software and also implement AI to help with operational multifamily analysis. My background spent about 10 years in the multifamily industry. Started as a financial analyst at Greystar, and then moved over to an owner-managed portfolio called Steadfast, where we grew from about 5,000 units to 30,000 units over a couple of years. Done all kinds of roles in multifamily, from due diligence, underwriting. Was like the Excel guy, at the owner managed company Steadfast. And then my last role was director of revenue management there before I quit my job about 2 years ago to start a software company in the space. So yeah, I'm super excited to talk to you guys today about whatever you guys want to talk about here with multifamily.
You got to be careful branding yourself as the Excel guy at a company, because
Mm-hmm.
then next thing you know,
Mm-hmm.
everyone will be coming to you and be like, please fix this formula. And then you own it.
They did. They definitely did do that. Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, we had a guy we used to work with, Andrew, who became the Excel guy when we were at the Post. And I feel like Reed would go to him, and he'll still bring him up now. Reed will be like, I wish Andrew was here to just like fix this thing. So anyways, yeah, got to be careful about that. Nicole, what would you not want to brand yourself as now? Like if you're going to another company?
Ooh, good question. I mean, maybe like the PowerPoint presentation person. That's a big pain point for us, especially like being on the client side. We're always fine tuning the PowerPoints and making sure it all matches and the bullets and all of that. So I've done a lot of that, but I probably wouldn't want to continue doing that moving forward.
I would want to be branded as like, trying to think of the word, not worthless, but can't do anything guy.
No one goes to you.
Yeah, please don't come to me for anything, because I can't do anything. All right. Well, Bryant, so you were at Steadfast for quite a while and had done a lot of, as you're saying, like financial modeling, budgeting, and the like. I'm assuming that's how Vizibly happened. I'm guessing you're trying to like scratch your own itch. So would you give us like sort of like what was the catalyst for you to do Vizibly? What frustrations were you running into?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, you mentioned about what not to brand yourself as. I was the guy at Steadfast where everyone came for help with some kind of financial modeling question. Certainly, a lot of Excel problems. And what I like about multifamily, and I'll give you sort of the long-winded answer here, is that it's sort of a place where like your people start off like as leasing agents, right? Very like friendly, customer service oriented people. But then, you get to a point where sometimes, the folks on site lack certain like financial or business acumen. You've got like your mom who has to make all these decisions on, like how to use technology the most effective way to maximize the value of a portfolio. And I really saw that there was just a huge disconnect there, because I certainly could spend all my time looking at financial models, but then I would give that to, let's say, like an assistant manager, a community manager, and it was like, what do I do with this, right? How do I actually put that into action? And really, where I saw this come to a head was, April 2020 during the lockdown, the pandemic, right? We were making these huge decisions as to what our rent growth, our occupancy, and renewal benchmarks needed to be for the quarter. And we basically had like no way to know what GPR was going to be next month, right? Like if I change these operational levers today, what is that going to result in some kind of financial outcome in the future without me having to spend like, tons of time, extracting data, putting the financial model together, getting input from the on-site staff. And even after we do all of that, it's still hard to know like how to actually operationalize that. And so that's really what the foundation of Vizibly really came down to, was like, how do we operationalize financial goals that we have for the properties, from like an owner, like a property manager, right? A VP and executive who has to come up with these for the customers or for the clients. And then how do we translate that into, bite-sized pieces for the on-site staff? And so that's what we're working on now. My co-founder, Ryan, his mom was a property manager. And so he really sort of understood firsthand how challenging it could be, to work in complicated systems like in Excel, or even, the property management systems that we have today. And so he had spent about 6 years in software product management working at, companies like LinkedIn. And he's like, we need to create just like a whole new operating system for the industry. And so that's really where Vizibly got started.
So, couple things I'm super excited to talk to you about. But one is, let me just recap. Like what I've seen in the past is companies will start budgeting in like July or August for the next year. So like they might start budgeting now for 24. Then it goes through multiple rounds of revisions and whatever. And a lot of times it's based on last year. It's like, hey, use last year's budget and add 2% or whatever, for inflation or something. Then when it comes into actual practice, the administration of that is super well, maybe not, maybe it doesn't even exist. It's just like, hey, you've put this in place and we have these Excel models, but there's no continual follow-up. And so when something happens, well, when life happens, it's hard to know, like, how are we tracking against budget? But then obviously if something big like the pandemic happens, it's like there's no real way to mechanize this. Is that is that fair? And then where does your system sit in that, if that is fair? Like, is it now the source of truth for all of these budgeting and administration, or is it more like a forecasting, you know, type of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, there's a lot of pieces in the call it financial forecasting landscape that's very broken. First off, certainly, I think on acquiring the right inputs, right, the data that comes out of the property management system primarily, that could be a really huge lift for financial analysts teams that have to do this at scale. The interesting thing about it is that when you're call it like a mid-sized management company, the budget administrator is like the president of the management company, right? Like they're the ones that have sort of the most skin in the game to making sure that the financial projections are accurate, but they don't have like a huge FP&A team, right, that can go and spin up all these models, or someone like me, right, who can start putting together all these forecasts and projections. And so we find that to be just like a super inefficient and like wasteful, right, use of time for someone like an executive who has to be more strategic. Secondly, I think another place with friction points is that, like you mentioned, after just a few months, right, like your budget can sometimes get stale because like something in your market changed, right, or there's some kind of issue at the property. Maybe you lost some staff, right, and so you can be really quickly off of budget, and it can be hard to know what should be the right benchmarks then for the teams when there's probably like not realistic that we're probably going to get back on track. And I think in a world where you can sort of grow yourself out of many problems like we've seen in the past 10 years, then who cares, right? Because like as long as we're paying distributions, like, okay, so we're on or off of budget. That might not be the most important piece to manage. Maybe that's like the unspoken secret in property management, right? That um, certainly the budgets matter, but the returns are what they are, right? And as long as we're meeting distribution, that's fine. But now when we're sort of in this new era of potentially like decreasing rent growth, right, higher vacancy loss, or just like the inflation growth that we've seen in many pieces of the P&L from like payroll, insurance, et cetera, right? We're starting to see, I think, just margins like decrease for the property management organization, certainly for the returns of the portfolios. And so in a time where you need to be really tactical, like now's when you want forecasting to be really streamlined, right? So that you could really figure out which are the markets that are really resulting in great results for the portfolio. Where can we like really like get returns out of the properties that are doing well, and the ones that aren't doing well, how can we actually like figure out which operational levers we want to pull on to meet those return objectives. And I think it really depends on the kind of portfolio that you have, and the kind of financing you have on the properties. Certainly, that's been a big topic in the past, couple of years, or sorry, in this past year. We see a lot of owners switch from, call it like rent growth focused strategies to cash flow focused strategies, right? Where you have to meet minimum distributions, make sure you're not defaulting on your debt. Those are going to be, I think, issues that many owners are going to be facing over the next 18 months. And that's where our software comes in to streamline, many pieces of that flow from, creating the financial plan and the strategy for the portfolio, but then also forecasting where you're going to end up so that where you can pull on your operations.
So would you then say people today are handling this via Excel, and then but there's not are there other options that companies are using, in property management to handle this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think on the creating, kind of like a financial strategy, certainly I think most folks do this in Excel. Even large companies tend to use this. Everyone's got some kind of budget template that they're using, right, for their forecast. But certainly outside of the budget process directly, right, a lot of analysts will put together financial models, right, in Excel, and that could have its own form of challenges whenever you have to spin one of these up. What we do see is that folks use some kind of combination of Excel, reports out of the property management system. Maybe you've got like a BI solution where you do trend analysis, or sometimes like you're downloading reports out of like CoStar or any kind of other market benchmarking studies so that you can come up with these projections moving forward. So it's quite a big mix, and depends, I think, on the sophistication the customers. The ones where we see, I think, the biggest pressure to perform have been in third party, management companies, because 30-day notice, they can fire you, and you need to stay competitive. And so we see that they have a really big need to know what's going on so that they can justify their operational decisions to their clients. And so we're certainly see a lot of folks ask us for help in that regard from that group.
Yeah, I'm more thinking about your sales process and your target, because what we found is when we came out with Fiona, everyone loved it, but they were like, "Shoot, I don't have a line item for this right now," and so it was like moving mountains to get them to buy our predictive and forecasting software. And so, if most of your folks are using Excel today, or a combination like smattering of reports put together, which basically ends up being Excel, I could see you guys being challenged for someone to find the budget to use it, because it's not like oh, this is better than that other thing, so let me buy this instead. Instead, they got to create a budget for it. So is that true, or is it way less challenging than that for you guys because it's such a pain point?
Yeah, so I think if you would have asked me a year ago, it might have been a different answer. Today with the advent of, or call it the adoption of generative AI, and all the things we're seeing with like ChatGPT, and ways in which you could train a model to be sort of like an AI co-pilot for your operational and financial decisions in multifamily. That's what we work on. Trying to maximize the effectiveness of that new technology. Yeah, I certainly see a consolidation of the tech stack around analytics really occurring, right? So when before you used to have your financial analysts that use BI, and then you try to sort of explain that to your on-site teams who may or may not adopt those recommendations, that can be a really big challenge just from like a user interface standpoint. And also the on-site teams sometimes aren't the best data analysts, right, to present this information to. And so that's where we're seeing generative AI bridge that gap really closely, and we get a lot of folks excited about the technology that we're building.
Okay. Well, I got two last things before I'll let Nicole get a word in here. One is, if I guess anytime that you have you mentioned operating system before to us, anytime that you're becoming someone's operating system, it feels like a huge amount of friction to end up for someone to make that choice to roll it out, let alone like adopt it and it become part of the process. So is there more of an easy entry where you're like, hey, just use our system Vizibly for this thing, and then it's like you guys land it and they can expand it? Or do they really need to just adopt the whole thing across the board in order to get the value or see the value, and for you guys to get traction?
Yeah. That's a good question. So what we find today is that large and small owners today create what we're calling action plans and some kind of manual process, right? So a lot of companies will have something like a Monday report that they put together, and that's how they get everyone aligned on the different operational goals that they want to go and tackle week after week. That alone has a ton of problems just because it's very manual and takes a ton of time to put together, and there's basically no accountability. And so our software is replacing certain workflows like that, like consolidating some of that reporting, and also just making it a lot easier to coordinate on the specific action items that you want to go and tackle, in any given week. And the things that we're sort of working to move that forward is in a recommendations engine. Basically our AI will read the financial and operational data and then provide practical recommendations to the teams so that way you don't have to wait for your Monday meeting to be able to go take action today on whatever operational issue you have at the property. And so, for us, it's like we're looking for customers that, yeah, it's not for everyone. It certainly requires, I think, a certain level of need for you to be very tactical with your real estate. So the kind of properties that we onboard are like the problem properties. Like, I need to turn this around in the next 90 days. Like, I need all the help I can get because I've got like 2 open positions and my regional manager is doing like the best they can. You know what I mean? And so I think as we get through those use cases, right, we're sort of a new company starting to get more and more information about how people will actually use the software. I think that'll help us, with go to market and expanding the strategy to other use cases.
So it sounds like they don't have to roll it out to the portfolio to start. They can test it on something, show success, and then move from there.
Mm-hmm.
And then as far as that success point, is it more of like I guess, is the aha moment, that Monday morning report, or not even, I guess, not even producing the Monday morning report, because you mentioned action items. I could just imagine, like, people struggle, from what we've seen with our stuff is, like, if we give them like a platform to log into to get recommendations, they just won't. I mean, maybe they will when it's like the property's on fire, but then they'll quickly forget about it and like the pain it solved them. So we almost have to like give them, hey, here's what to do. And by the way, we already did it, in order for them to have the aha moment to be like, oh shoot, yeah, it's working for me. But if it just tells them what to do, we were experiencing the fact that most people saw it as extra homework, and they're like, well, shoot, I'm already so busy, I don't have time to do even more homework. So it's almost like it almost backfired on us, because our machine would be recommending things, and then they see it as extra work, and they're like, shoot, now that I see it, I can't unsee it, but I also don't want to buy it for more properties, because then I'm going to see even more problems than I think I have today, and just stress me out more. So I guess I'm asking, that aha moment, is it the Monday report, or is it something else that really gets people to latch on?
We're seeing the aha moments happen really in the coordination between what we call like corporate services departments. So certainly, right, we want the on-site teams to go and execute on action plans, but there's a lot of friction in just the communication between someone like a revenue manager who's looking at pricing information, an asset manager who's like trying to figure out whether they're going to make the distributions or not, a VP who just wants to know, right, where the availability is falling off a cliff and what they should do about it. A lot of strategy gets created at the corporate office between email, text, and all these different systems. And so it's good to get kind of the meeting of the minds on our platform, because you've got one place where you could see those recommendations and then just assign action items right to the rest of the teams. So I think that's really the part where it's sort of a challenge as a software company, as we think about the user interface and like who we're designing this for, there's just a lot of friction points in the executing on a financial plan for multifamily that I think we need to solve, both the executives and sort of the leaders who are coming up with like the analysis and the action plans that they need to go execute on, but then in a way that's really easy for the on-site team members. And that's where I think we've got an edge, just because we've done this before, as former operators.
Yeah. Well, Nicole, he mentioned like everybody have it looking at the same dashboard. I feel like that's a pain that we've all felt like a lot, where we're all looking at different dashboards and things. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, my questions when that came up for me when you were talking through that is just, how do you guys approach like the training and making sure that you have these power users? Because it seems like you're servicing multiple different personas and segments, and you probably have those folks that are in there every day. They get it, but you also have to service, to your point, maybe some of the on-site staff who's not always in some of these systems. So how do you handle the training from an onboarding perspective for the platform?
Yeah, the training is just so critical, because that's how we make sure that we've got happy customers that refer us even more customers. Certainly on the budgeting side, folks have found it super easy to work in the system. We our kind of internal joke is we designed this for Ryan's mom, hashtag Ryan's mom, if she's listening out there, which is basically like
Love that.
big buttons and like easy to read formulas on plain English, but obviously, like with the power tools for someone like me, right, who'd have to do this at scale to be able to do that. So I think a lot of the UI is centered around that. Yeah, I mean, for the training, it's like, last year, for example, we went to budget boot camps. We actually went to, where they actually did the training. We talked to the staff. A lot of companies do it in a very similar way, where they huddle everyone together and they coordinate on strategy for the next year. And so, we sort of try to meet the customers where they're at. I think as we grow, we can't go to every budget boot camp. So we added, little things like a chat icon, where you can come and chat us directly in there. And then I think we certainly spend a ton of time on training the different modules to each persona. So a budget admin will need a lot different functionality than, let's say, like a community manager who needs to know just how to like enter the data in the system, get in, get out, because the goal of a budget process is to get everyone to focus on the budget for a concentrated period of time and then get them back to work, right? And so we try to make everything as efficient as possible there.
Totally. Yeah, the goal would be to not have to, maybe service the clients as heavily. So do you guys have certain time frames where it's like, okay, during onboarding, we're going to, hold your hand and do calls once a week, or, whatever that looks like, and then eventually get it to be more self-serve? Or what have you found is more real world in the industry?
Yeah, real world has been, I think, for budget season to add extra availability during budget season, and I think just because it's in our DNA to be part of a budget process and to go through that, as sort of the person who led the budget process at Steadfast, we certainly have a ton of sympathy for the folks who are going through it, right? And I think it's really about responding quickly, right? Providing like real solutions for how you'd want to model something, for example. And then if we don't have sort of the answer directly in the product, we certainly can cook something up really quickly and offer sort of like a workaround as we develop more of the feature set in budgeting. We've got, I think, probably like 99% of it covered, just because we did that before and it's our background. But certainly we're always learning more, yeah, from the users as we just see just the different situations that multifamily is going through now, right? Like I mentioned before, I think the biggest need is really in generating enough cash to meet your distributions, and that's not really, I think, someplace where multifamily has really had to focus on. So it's about like which operational levers do I pull to meet my investment return goals, for next year.
Awesome. And that probably gives you guys more of, positioning you as the strategic consultant, which is basically our business model, is being that consultant when it comes to your marketing. And so through that, then you get more referrals. And really, if you can ingrain yourself in their budgeting process, then you're almost seen, I would assume, as an extension of their team. Like they want you there to help guide them through that process. So that's awesome.
Yep, that's right. And it's also just an interesting place from a data perspective. Certainly we don't share any data, right, with anyone else other than just kind of our own internal training of models, right, and as we think about it. But it has been interesting to see just expense growth. I mean, really go off the page in so many different P&Ls, throughout the properties. Insurance is certainly really painful to budget for. Taxes in certain jurisdictions is really crazy. Staffing, also payroll has been another one that we've been just tracking the year-over-year growth. So we'll see, I guess, how the multifamily industry responds to all of these pressures, on the expense side. And we're obviously, I think, thinking about just different solutions to help solve those pain points, especially around insurance. Even just like I was looking at a couple of deals the other day, and they budget like 3% year-over-year rent growth, on a pro forma for insurance. For insurance specifically, and I just thought like there's just no way. So I really wonder how the multifamily industry, especially on the syndication side, will adjust to kind of the really high inflation that we're seeing for multifamily.
Yeah. Being in the industry for 10 years, do you have like that example and that pain point where you're like, I'm never going to make that mistake again? Or, so I attended the NAA budgeting session and there was all these stories around like, okay, it was due on a Monday and Friday we had to like pull an all-nighter to update because someone didn't save the Excel. So there's always something, I feel like, when it comes to like the deadlines in the industry. So I'm curious if you have your own personal story that maybe left a scar.
Man, budgeting is just such a team effort. I think a lot of times companies sort of leave it till the end, or they think they could just sort of crank it out in a week. But, in our experience, the best budgets get created when everyone collaborates and there's sort of like a coordinated way to fill them in. And so I think supporting like multi-user, data entry is really important in any budget process. And so that we don't have like any bottlenecks, right, when folks are trying to get their numbers in. Other things that I remember really paid dividends for us was making sure that your CAPEX strategy is, determined ahead of time, right? So that you don't sort of load in $30 million worth of CAPEX and you realize you only got 10, and suddenly you got to go and redo all these like rent growth assumptions. So I think those are really great. The faster you can put together a CAPEX strategy, the better. Though certainly I think a lot of folks wait until the end because that's when they know which projects, might really make it right on the budget. And then the last recommendation I would give is, you want to budget early, but you don't want to budget too early, right? Because your actuals come in and suddenly you have to like reforecast the whole thing. And it could potentially be November and you've got still like numbers from August. And that could also lead to a ton of data inaccuracies when you start in January. And so I think it's sort of this mix of like, you want to do it early, but not too early. And if you're going to do it, you want to be able to refresh the data really quickly, right? So that you can go and do the quick reforecast. And so that's where I think, software like ours really helps address that pain point because we've got those data integrations with the property management systems. But it can definitely be a lot of work if you don't have something like that, ready to go and set up for your organization.
Brian, I have a hot take, and you can push back on me on this, and
Yeah.
I can't wait to get your own hot takes. So, Ryan, who's our head of finance here, I've pushed back on him and Reed before because they're like, "Oh, we got to do 2023 budget or 2024 budget," and I'm like, "Cool, that is good for like 30 days, and it's nice to like look at or whatever." But then every year we've been outgrowing and outpacing our budget, and so I said, what is the point of us spending? You know, Ryan spends over 100 hours like pulling it together. So what is the point of doing that just like arbitrarily in Q3, Q4 for the next year versus like having an always live, I'll say like, I don't even want to call it budget, but just like an always live financial model or something. Like basically doing it once a year seems very arbitrary to me versus doing it like continually updating it over time. So I could see that maybe being different with a property because with the property you want it to it's supposed to be a lot of people invest in them as if they're like a bond or some sort of stock or something. They just want the free cash flow. But you obviously now are at a young startup. So I'm wondering if you think of it differently, or would you agree with me that there's not a lot of value in doing this annual budgeting process, that maybe we should be doing it differently?
David with the controversial opinion. I like it. Yeah, I mean, I think, the issue is that, by the management agreement, they're due, right? So even if you didn't want to do it, you still got to do it anyway, right? Because the management company owes it to the asset manager. So it's really just about doing it as quickly as possible, as accurate as possible, and then get everyone back to managing the properties. So it's a little different in the multifamily context, certainly. There's a lot of benefits, I think, to doing rolling forecasts, which is what you're talking about, which is, hey, let's just budget year round, right? And so the key there is really to set modeling assumptions for different parts of your G&L. So as the new actuals come in, they'll be forecast automatically, right? And so you don't spend a ton of time in the nitty gritty, the details. And I think for the more sophisticated, I think owners, I think probably like a regular reforecast, quarterly, maybe semi-annually, where you are doing kind of extra steps other than like the automatic projection, will help you just get a little bit more accurate.
Yeah, well, I like that you agree with me here because I think rolling makes a lot more sense, and or doing this quarterly reforecast thing that you're talking about. When it's annually, it's just not frequent enough for me for you to adapt. And then when you want someone to adapt another department or some opportunity comes up, it's like they freak out because they're like, oh shoot, it's not September. I don't, and I don't want our finance team or any other finance team just also like wasting a bunch of administrative effort though doing it like every month, for example. So it's for me it's more about how do you make it more of a continual part of your cycle without over going like all the way to zero based budgeting or something. So that's why I was asking. And so I guess I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you guys do it for your own company at Visibly. Do you do it any different than you would have done it for a property, or is it very similar?
Yeah, no, I think a budget, a financial projection is your North Star, right? Because that tells you where you need to spend more money, like how much, returns or growth do I need on, my revenue, for example, to be able to make a difference, for the portfolio. So we certainly do that often here, just because obviously that's something that we did in multifamily. And we apply that same logic here. But I think for properties that are running into problems, I think this is exactly where you'd want to do extra focus on your financials, right? So just to give you an example, it's sort of like if you're running into rent problems, right? It's like, do we push on renewals? Do we want to just shoot for a higher renewal percentage, right? And save some of the cash on the turnover. And how many renewals do I need to be able to get to the NOI target that I want? And so if I'm going to shoot for renewals, like what's the rent growth assumptions I want to shoot for, and how do I actually operationalize, for this next upcoming expirations that are happening. And so all these decisions need to be done, I think really quickly, because every 2 weeks you got to send out new renewal letters out, right? And so the sooner you can come up with your financial plan, the sooner you can direct your staff to go and execute on it. And I think that's why it's really good to have software. I think especially for multifamily, where millions of dollars in portfolio value depend on whether someone signs $50 more on the renewal lease. I mean, it's just crazy, right? Like just because of the way cap rates work. And so I think it's one of those industries where everything's made on incremental improvements to NOI. And so this is why you want to be like extra detailed with the ones that I think are causing you problems.
Cool. Well, I have two more things I want to get into before giving Nicole another chance. One is how flexible is your system versus like sort of forcing people one direction. So I say that because there's systems like, I view this like software simulators like Mosaic and some of these others that have come out more that hit general purpose companies versus property management. And some of those systems are very specific, where they're like, hey, you got to enter in this input and you'll get this output, or like whatever. And others let you build custom formulas and blah, blah, blah. Like, but you have to basically almost like learn their language for their system. It's kind of Nicole's point. Then you have to really develop a power user, but it's a lot to ask of somebody to like learn a new language effectively to build something. And obviously if you force them into a box, then you may be like, you may be shutting out some potential targets because they're like, I don't want to adapt to your box. I want to do it this way. Because a lot of people in property management seem to, like to sort of puff out their chest and say, hey, we don't do it the typical way. We do it our way. And this is why it's better. But then if you go the other way, where you make it super flexible so that those people can be customers, there's more potential for someone to break something or for it to go awry or something. And then them almost blame the software, saying, this effing software is like causing all these problems. It's like, no, it's just because of the way you built it and you didn't follow best practice. So long-winded way to ask, is it super open and flexible, or is it more locked down, or somewhere in between?
That's a good question. I think you want it open and flexible in some areas, and then you want it to just be pretty straightforward in others, right? So just to give you an example, what you want to do is we wanted to make it open and flexible for importing things like different data sources, right? Obviously, not everything's going to be in your property management system. There's a ton of data that lives in your payroll system, live in Excel. You're just going to have different, I think, data sources that you want to put into the context of budgeting, for example. And so in that sense, we made it very flexible to be able to import those data sources. I think on the specific workflows for figuring out, how to budget for it, you want that to be like very straightforward, right? You want the on-site teams to just like know exactly where to go to enter their assumptions, right? And then you want power tools for budget admins to, if I need to override everything, I can do that with 2 clicks. And so in that sense, we made it just like, specific for the multifamily use case. And we think that that's a winning combo, I think, for getting through a budget season as efficiently as possible. When we're first making it, we thought like, let's make TurboTax for multifamily property budgeting, we think that that's the best approach to making this like super complicated, FP&A tool, like another BI solution sort of for multifamily, because also I think the customers just aren't there. We think on something like budgeting. Most multifamily companies, right, are 4 to 6,000 units, right? Like you don't have a giant IT team to do this crazy implementation. You need something out of the box, ready to go. If you've got like 50,000 units, you probably already have a whole FP&A team and maybe like software like that. We really go after, I think, mid-market companies that just need to do the most with what they've got.
Well, that's super helpful context for me. So last question there would be, if someone layers in something like, hey, we're going to host an event, or we're going to put in this this marketing spend on this thing, or the sponsorship, does it spit out an assumption, or does someone have to put in an assumption, I guess, where it's like, hey, by spending 10 grand on this event, we're going to get 3 more leases out of it? Because I'll say that's where our team has struggled. We do use Mosaic just to be open, but they will be like, we had another 40,000. We're going to PropTech and we're going to spend 40,000, and then they don't layer in any assumptions from growth, like revenue growth from that, and then they'll be like, look how far off budget we are, and it's like, well, shouldn't we expect something to come out of that investment that we just made? And it goes beyond marketing; it could go to anything. And so I'm just wondering how that gets handled in your system.
Yeah. So we do have analytics at the GL level that will tell you things like year-over-year growth, right? How much of your budget remains? What are some of the trends that we're seeing for the account? So certainly, I think folks can look at that to figure out whether their assumptions are reasonable or aggressive or conservative. We also have another feature on the reporting side where you can do your monthly variance analysis through us, and variance analysis is sort of like a not something that people I think often think about, but it can be just a huge time sink for the staff to go and look at their financials and then comment right in each account, how they've been doing. And so what our system does is it reads the assumptions that you put in for your budget, and then it tells you, why it is that you're off of your budget, in any given month. So for example, if you were estimating 20 move outs, right, for your apartment cleaning line item, and you ended up with 25, then the system automatically tells you in a narrative explanation, how many move outs you did over what you assumed in your budget. And so little things like that, on the aggregate can result in a ton of time savings. And I think I think the next phase in budgeting is really, can we just produce a budget forecast for all the P&Ls without requiring so much of the data input, almost like with AI? That's the kind of things that I think we're interested in exploring now.
Yeah, well, what you just described is great for reporting on things that happened or that were different, that were variant. But what about on the forecasting side? So, very easy example, we have customers that have a gold package on apartments.com and they're like, "Hey, next year we're layering in the diamond package." So, would they then say, "Hey, by doing a diamond package, I'm expecting 2 more leases a month?" Or would you guys say, "Hey, maybe expect 2 more leases a month?" How, what would actually happen?
Yeah. So that's another product that we're working on, and we haven't released something like that yet, but we are working on something like that where it would give you sort of day-to-day recommendations on different parts of your operational decision making, where it would do some of that break-even analysis. Yep.
Got it. Yeah, no, that's helpful. I was wondering that this is why I mean it when I think operating system, there's so many different
Hmm.
tools where it's like, is it really
Yep.
you get everything or you get different things? But yeah, I feel like reporting and forecasting are so closely tied together that
Hmm.
the lines get very blurred and then different systems provide different um, hit different areas of that, like, okay, is it really historical, is it current, or is it forecast? And it's hard to know which of these systems is really doing like what they do really well versus where they still have room to grow. So that's helpful, just context to think about. It's
Yeah.
another product you guys are working on.
Hmm. Yeah.
Cool,
I
cool.
mean, I think there's kind of two sides to that. There's what I'm calling like call it like micro optimization of your workflows on site. Certainly, there's a ton of products that will try to do that, for different things like your renewal strategy or your marketing automation, things like that. And then there's like the day-to-day reporting that you've got to do for your property so you know what to do about it. We're trying to bridge that gap, between what are all the things that you're already micro optimizing in different parts of your operations, and then how do we combine that with financial outcomes, right, that you want to hit. And so we're building, a tool set around that so that folks who have a portfolio of, let's say 10,000 apartments can really easily create those financial plans, but then you can still rely on on your existing tech stack, right, to go and implement those.
Cool. Well, my questions are more kind of switching gears a little bit to like the company building side of things. You mentioned the origin story, but I just love talking to other founders about timing. Like the timing is so important. The timing, for you, for Ryan, for the market. How did you know the timing was right to leave Steadfast and start Vizibly?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, first off, I called 100 property managers and I asked them, I was like, how do you do this? Like, how do you do your budgets? Like, is it just me, who have been struggling with this issue at Steadfast? And certainly, got a lot of folks to talk about their specific pain points and experiences, and thought that there was certainly an opportunity to introduce just an innovative way to do this right for multifamily. So that helps a lot. I would say before you quit your job, talk to people, and see whether that's the right opportunity. Secondly, I think I look at what everyone else looks at, the secular fundamentals for multifamily, a huge housing shortage, tons of capital going into the deals, right? And basically what everyone's saying, 10 to 15, maybe 20 years of sustained growth in multifamily until, Gen Z retires. And so I think broadly as an industry, I find it incredibly compelling to not just go in, for potentially like investments, but also ways to make, the industry, I think, a lot more efficient and improve that. So I think whatever market cycles we're in now, like I'm still long-term bullish on, everything that's going on, I think, for the multifamily industry. Yeah. And then third, I just thought there's always going to be a job in real estate. I can always just go back to real estate, So for me, it wasn't risky at all. It was just like, yeah, let's just go pursue a big dream, and if I can inspire people to go work on this with me for a few years, even like that would be a huge win and a big, I think, opportunity for growth. And certainly that's been the case. It's really awesome to watch a PhD work on budgeting, like how to solve the budgeting problem when this used to live on my laptop. You know what I mean? And so it's awesome collaborating with, I think, folks on our team, who are just like these experts in like AI and machine learning. Like think about the multifamily industry when I think about, the folks I used to work with and how I think how much technical analysis we can bring into this industry that's basically still working off of, a lot of heuristics like, yeah, we should budget, 1,000 per door, for some expense line item. Man, there's so much more that we can do. And that's what I'm excited about doing it.
That's awesome. That's super cool. You mentioned the team. I think that's one of the most rewarding things, in our experience has been growing and developing the team. It seems like people and culture are super important to you guys. I know some of your core values are like adopting a growth mindset and going the extra mile. How do you think about building the team and the culture in the first few years?
Yeah, that I think, especially at our phase, it's like every single person who comes into Vizibly, it just plays such a critical role, right? Because we were trying to build a massive business, right, that helps solve really big pain points for multifamily owners, investors, property managers. So certainly, I think we've got a really strong commitment to making sure that everyone has the right sort of like skill set and contributes to the, right now it's like very code oriented, right? It's like we need to build really innovative technology here. And so that they certainly set a really high bar for all the developers that come into Vizibly. But I think at the same time, it's really important for us to just have that, I think, just deep empathy for the users that use our software, right? And like I did due diligence for about 5 years with Steadfast. Got to travel to the South, the Southeast. Like Louisville, I grew up like in Long Beach area, the Bay Area. Certainly had never thought I'd go to like, Lexington, Kentucky, for example. And I think just from all the travel, kicking the tires on the real estate, it just made me really appreciate the kind of people that work there, and how we need to make tools that just make their lives a lot easier because they deal, as an industry, right, with hundreds of millions of residents, right? Like our industry serves everyone who needs housing, and I just find that to be like an incredibly compelling reason to want to be in the multifamily industry, from class A and luxury all the way to affordable housing. I remember being at one of our properties in Atlanta that had a really heavy like immigrant population, and it's like 8 a.m. There's like 100 kids outside waiting for the bus, and I just thought about how important it was that, our business helps supported, all of those families, right? And all those people there. And so I think it's a combination of just like, let's make really great technology in a time where it's sort of really amazing to introduce things like AI and machine learning to the industry, but at the same time, in a way that serves, right, normal people who are just trying to raise their families and, pursue whatever dreams in a way that's, safe and, reliable, right? Housing is just such an important, part of everyone's lives. And so I'm glad that we get to contribute even just a small part there.
Totally. Are you finding that you have to spend a lot of time upfront, like training and teaching people multifamily? Because that was one of our challenges. We either hired people from the industry and taught them digital marketing, or we hired expert digital marketers and taught them multifamily. And there's, pros and cons to each. But that is definitely, it's almost like you have to do a crash course within the industry. Are you finding that as a challenge, or what's been your experience there?
Yeah, so luckily we've been able to bring on folks that worked at other PropTech companies as well. So the learning curve hasn't been so steep. Certainly, I think on the data side, that part's been, I think, more straightforward for them. It's like, how do we get the data out of these systems? They're used to working with super super large data sets. So I think for them, it's more frustration on trying to get data out and doing really interesting things for them. But for like someone like our designer, it's like we put them in like right with the managers, the regional managers, like learning all their different workflows. We flew out, like I mentioned, to some of the budget boot camps, and got to meet a lot of the staff. So I think for them, they find it really interesting to really shadow them, right, and train them from the multifamily perspective. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, last question for me, and then I'll pass it back to David, is just around like operational efficiency. Obviously, that's what your platform does. How do you think about that in terms of the business? Like, what systems and processes are you putting in place now to help scale and make the business as operationally efficient as possible?
You mean my personal business? Or
Yeah,
what
yeah.
you mean? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, certainly doing a deep dive on marketing, right, and all the marketing analytics that you can do. I think it's a really interesting time to be a prop tech company, just with how much money has gone into the space to help optimize different pieces of real estate, right? Not just in multifamily, but like commercial real estate. I think all these things that are happening, I think in the office space are going to be really interesting from a technology standpoint to see how we can help recover some of the some of the losses, right, that are happening over there. And I think for us, we are excited to just follow the fundraising environment, right? I think as it picks up into prop tech. So some things that we work on is like, yeah, how do we, break the mold of like, having people, purchase technology in a way that doesn't drain a ton of resources, for them. So just for example, right, like companies today, they've only got like 3 to 4 implementations per year that they could do, right, for a lot of technology spend, just because of how stressful it is to go through something like an integration. And so, as we work on integrating all these different data sources, it's like, how can we create products in the future that might make that process just a little bit easier for folks? And even just the way people find us, like I think this industry has been so focused on conferences. Certainly, that's still, I think, a big source to meet people. But this is just like a better way to go and meet other technologists and folks that want to do interesting things in the space. So some things that we've been liking is like a multifamily demo day. I think Multifamily Insiders has like a whole little group that they've been starting. So we're just trying to get plugged in, to LinkedIn and see, how we can meet other like-minded people, that are interested in the technology that we're building.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's like you kind of have to be at some of the big conferences, but really a lot of those smaller events help more networking, and then the referrals come. So yeah, you kind of have to be in both places. But I thought your team crushed it at NAA. I think that's where we first stumbled upon you guys. But some really smart marketing tactics, in terms of where your team was positioned at certain sessions, and I thought it was really fun.
Oh, thank you for that. It's guerrilla tactics over here. Check as much buzz
Yeah,
fast. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah, ask forgiveness. I love that you said that you think about it in 3 to 4 rollouts a year for a company, because I think that's where a lot of other founders in this industry get it sort of mess up. They're like, oh, well, we're only X dollars and we're going to return 4X that or whatever. Why won't they buy? And they get so frustrated. It's like, because they can only handle X amount of organizational
Yeah.
change in a year. And it's like, this industry has been, a bit behind other similar industries. So therefore, is your product, whatever company, really like one of the top 3 that they need to replace
Yeah.
this year, or are there bigger fish to fry? So I love that you're thinking about it in that context. All right, well, I have just a couple of quick ones to wrap up here, and then if there's anything we missed, Bryant. But one is you guys do quite a bit on your blog, and you mentioned. And you sort of hinted at it earlier, where it's like, hey, in the good times in real estate, as long as people are getting their distributions, they don't really care. Or it's sort of like we used to hear from our old CEO at the Post. He said revenue solves all problems. I kind of take it that way. It's like dividend solves all problems. So it's like, even if your budget was way off, if I got my dividends and it was what it was expected, what do I care? So where I'm going with that is, that's saying in the good times. And then you also said you're very bullish on what this industry is going to do over the next couple of decades. But do you see over the next couple of decades there being any sort of, quote, downturn or down times, or do you think it's going to still be pretty gravy, for multifamily over the next few years?
Yeah, that's a question. I think a lot of it depends on, which markets and where you are, right? Certainly, it's hard to imagine that even with like, all of the supply in Austin, that's going to be a bad market to be in, over the next 20 years, right? It's hard to imagine that rents would go down there, or like in Dallas, for example. But it's like I sometimes do wonder, like, hey, will the insurance market just really collapsing in Florida, will that really detract people from, building, large scale projects there? Certainly hasn't slowed down, right? Like you still see a ton of development. Tampa is a really great market that we've been looking at. North Carolina, right? Like there's a ton of room for growth and opportunities. The things that I think about a lot, David, are as different waves come, like in technology and market dynamics, is there basically like a different way to run like a property management organization? Like just to give you an example, so we've been thinking about how you could potentially scale up the regional manager team, right? Like, can they manage more properties, and like what kind of technology or tools would they need to be able to manage more and more properties? Like, can they manage 20 properties? Like, can they manage 30 properties? Like, because right now it's like we had a rule, which was like, let's give them 3,000 units, like one per 3,000 units. So it's like everyone's got like their own little ratio, right? And so then I was thinking like, okay, so suppose you had tools that help them have 10,000 units, 15,000 units for regional managers. Certainly that's going to be returns on operating margin for the property management company, right? And already what are thin margins for property managers, with 3 to 6% fee on the revenue, right? But then I thought like, okay, but suppose that you take that same technology, but you made it in such a way that like a community manager, can manage more properties. Maybe this is like the centralization piece, right? Where a lot of companies are starting to centralize their operations. Well, isn't it better to have the community managers manage more properties because their payroll comes from the properties, right? And so like if you're sort of indifferent between one or the other, then like you definitely want to encourage the community managers to have more properties. And so is that the end of a regional manager role, for example, like, or what are the different career opportunities that, that could potentially open up? And so I just think that in the next 5 years, with things like AI, with the stuff that we're working on, with ways to really surface operational issues and then create solutions that optimize them, I just feel like a property management organization would look very different, in the next couple of years. And that I think is going to be a really interesting source of returns. And I think you're already starting to see where potentially M&A activity at the property management level, portfolio consolidation, might be coming into play there. And so, yeah, we're excited to see what happens there.
Yeah, I'm less optimistic, although I like to be optimistic, meaning when you say the next couple of years, the companies will look different. I think the industry moves too damn slow and it won't look that different. Now, to your point, like when investors are used to getting 18 to 21%, as long as they're getting sort of that range, then they're going to be cool, just sort of like, set and forget. Right now, that leaves opportunity though, because if you did automate, and I love the way you're thinking about like, is there a different way to run it, like property RPMs handling more properties? We think that about our management staff. Instead of our management staff meaning targeting 5 to 8 employees that they're managing, could it be like 10 to 12? For example, and it should be really based on expectations. So what do we really expect them to do, a manager? How much coaching versus how much like individual contributor projects? That sort of goes into like what their ratio can be. So where I'm going is if you did empower companies to go from giving 20% returns to investors to 28% returns because you said, hey, here's a new model you should try, they could clean up house. Like they could start to leverage that to get more loans, to acquire other management companies, to expand faster, or what have you. I don't think it'll be a wholesale change, though, is my point. I think there's plenty of opportunity there because just as you've seen, we've seen incredible amount of waste because people, the industry is complacent. And they haven't had the tough times recently, so they haven't had to really bear down and look for ways to be even more efficient because people are cool with the current returns. So I'm just saying I'm not as bullish, but it gives you there is opportunity there for whoever wants to take it.
Well, I think especially at the mid market, right, where a lot of the competitive advantage comes with having local market knowledge and ability to execute on some kind of strategy there, right? Like I think as they really focus in on, hey, we're really great at crushing, the Dallas market, and we've got the staff to go and do that, then maybe that would help, expand some of their market share against, the really large property managers who've got presence in every single state, and signing up with them is basically, in some ways, I think, they're managing yours and also your competitors, right? And so you can't have just like these giant companies also manage. And I think that's where the space for the mid-market players, could really come in. And so they've got to really answer, what's our competitive advantage? Is it technology? Is it ability to execute? Like, how can we be extra tactical here? And I think now more than ever, like it's easier to catch up, because also technology costs, I think, are way down, compared to the kind of infrastructure you would need in the past to be able to, have something pretty sophisticated.
Yeah, totally. Well, before we let you go, first one is, do you have any hot takes yourself? Is there anything where you're contrarian or, go against the grain, with your own thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can certainly follow us on our blog post, on Vizibly.io/blog. We think that there's just a different way that we could enable property management firms to be more operational efficient. We think AI is going to play a really big role in there. And so we hope that you follow along with us. For our thoughts there.
Is there any blog post right now that you would call controversial?
Controversial. I think the first one. Yeah, it's time to reimagine how to execute your multifamily operations.
Awesome. Yeah, we put up I wouldn't even say it was a controversial blog post in our early days, and I got to be careful here, but we were like, we called out one of the big tech companies in our space, and we just made a joke about them having more money than a third world country. And when we went to then partner up with them to do an API connection, they said, "Yep, you got to take that down, or we're not going to do it." And so I thought it was more of just a friendly joke, and they did not think it was a friendly joke. But as long as you're in your current spot, Bryant, I love the idea of you guys taking some controversial stances, and while you can, and same with the guerrilla marketing.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
And then last thing, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to get to real quick?
Yeah, we're going to be on Multifamily Demo Day. Encourage you to sign up if you want to check out our product.
You'll also be at PropTech. You just told us.
That's
so
right. We'll be there.
They can get it in person.
Yep. And I think Multifamily Executive also in September.
Awesome. Wow, you're more busy than we are on those. So good job on that. All right, cool. Well, if people want to get in touch with you or get a demo of Vizibly, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, you can go on our website, vizibly.io, or you can also find me on LinkedIn and now Threads. Are you on Threads, David?
I'm not. Our new head of product, Alex, is though. So better him than me, but glad you're on there.
Yeah. We're starting to come check us out. Post a lot of things on multifamily and technology. Happy to engage anyone in conversations there.
Yeah, I'm like a social media ghost. Like I basically don't participate. I will talk about how valuable it is to do, and then I will not do anything about it. So that's me.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us, Bryant.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Nicole. Bye.